The boys came to Detroit for a showcase for Berry Gordy.
She was the voice behind Anthems, the face of a generation, and the woman everyone thought had it all. But behind the sequins and spotlights, Diana Ross was fighting battles no one saw coming. Betrayals, power plays, and silent heartbreaks shaped the legend we thought we knew. What really happened behind the scenes?
We know that Michael and I are like family. We've shared many magic moments together, the early days and television specials, recording, and doing the movie The Wiz.
In 1983, Diana Ross was preparing for a high-profile performance at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. The venue was known for its glamour and exclusivity, attracting a crowd that expected nothing short of brilliance. That evening was supposed to be one of those unforgettable moments. One of Motown's most celebrated icons, taking the stage, backed by a world-class production. Backstage, the energy was intense but controlled. Her team was ready, the audience was seated, and the final checks were being made. Just minutes before showtime, however, something unexpected happened. A crew member reportedly approached the show's producer, looking visibly shaken. He was holding a backstage pass with a name scribbled across it. A name that changed everything. When Diana Ross saw it, she stopped. There was no outburst, no explanation. She simply looked at the producer and said, "If he's here, I'm not." That moment nearly brought a multi-million-dollar production to a halt. Nobody fully understood the weight of what had just happened, at least not right away. The show did go on, but the tone backstage had shifted. What was meant to be another career milestone had turned into a pointed reminder that some wounds run deep, even for someone as experienced and poised as Diana Ross. For years, Ross built her reputation on elegance and professionalism. Unlike many of her peers, she rarely engaged in public disputes or tabloid feuds. She was known for her calm public image and her ability to maintain grace under pressure. However, behind that polished exterior were stories that had rarely been spoken aloud. Stories of complicated relationships, strained collaborations, and personal betrayals. At the age of 81, Diana Ross is no longer holding back. Without sensationalism or public drama, she has started to speak more candidly about some of the people who left a mark, not always a positive one, on her long and remarkable career. What she's choosing to share now isn't about gossip or revenge. It's about finally setting the record straight, on her terms. To understand the context of that moment in Las Vegas, it's helpful to know where Diana Ross stood in her career at the time. By the early 1980s, she had already been a household name for more than 2 decades. First as the lead singer of the Supremes, Motown's most successful act during the 1960s, and later as a solo artist with chart-topping hits and film roles to her name. Her influence on music, fashion, and even business was undeniable. Yet, even with all her achievements, there were still situations where she didn't have complete control, where personal relationships influenced professional outcomes. The incident in Las Vegas marked a turning point. It wasn't just about one name on a pass. It symbolized years of silence, compromise, and managing complex relationships in an industry that often pits artists against each other. What makes this story particularly compelling is that Ross never took the easy route of airing grievances in the media. She let her work speak for itself. She stayed focused on the music, the performances, and the legacy she was building. But over time, the need to share her version of events became more important, especially as stories and assumptions from others began to fill in the blanks. Ross's decision to reflect publicly on her experiences isn't about rewriting history, it's about offering clarity. She's not just revisiting moments of tension or disappointment. She's shedding light on how those moments shaped her as an artist and as a person. In doing so, she's also giving audiences a deeper understanding of what it took to survive and thrive in an industry that wasn't always welcoming or fair, especially to Black women. The entertainment world of the 1960s through the 1980s was filled with talent, innovation, and success, but it was also an environment where power dynamics were often imbalanced. Many artists, especially women, had to navigate difficult paths just to have their voices heard. Diana Ross was no exception. Even at the peak of her fame, she encountered moments where her autonomy was questioned or her loyalty was tested. When the Backstage incident occurred in 1983, many insiders knew exactly who she was referring to. But Diana didn't name names. Not then. She didn't hold a press conference or release a statement. Instead, she chose silence. That kind of discipline takes strength, especially when it's easier to be reactive. It also reinforced the kind of image she had cultivated throughout her career, one of resilience, control, and professionalism. In recent years, there's been a renewed interest in the stories of music legends, especially those who are often marginalized or misunderstood during their peak years. Documentaries, interviews, and memoirs have allowed artists to reclaim their narratives. Diana Ross has mostly stayed out of those trends, preferring to keep her story guarded. So when she does speak, even subtly, it carries weight. It signals that there are still parts of her journey the world hasn't heard. This new openness doesn't change what she achieved. Her contributions to music and culture remain undisputed. What it does is offer a more complete picture, one that includes the challenges as well as the triumphs. It reminds audiences that behind every carefully choreographed performance and glamorous photo shoot is a human being who had to make difficult choices and who didn't always get the credit she deserved. As Ross begins to name those who hurt or disappointed her, whether they were collaborators, rivals, or former friends, it's not about casting blame. It's about acknowledging that even icons have limits. Even legends get tired of being misunderstood. And even the most composed figures have a breaking point. The Las Vegas moment was never about ego. It was about boundaries. It was a way of saying, I've given everything I can to this industry. I've stayed silent long enough. I deserve respect. And that, more than anything, is what defines this new chapter for Diana Ross. Not bitterness, but clarity. Audiences who have followed her career from the start may be surprised by some of what she's revealing now. Others may feel a sense of understanding, perhaps even admiration, for the restraint she showed for so long. Either way, it's a rare opportunity to hear directly from someone who's seen it all and is finally ready to speak. In 1969, Diana Ross stood at the peak of her career. She had already made history as the lead singer of the Supremes and was preparing to forge her path as a solo artist. But behind this public ascension lay stories of profound personal connections, relationships that shaped her and ultimately strained under the weight of fame, power, and ambition. First among these was the bond between Diana and Michael Jackson. Before he became the king of pop, Michael was a teenaged wunderkind fronting the Jackson 5. Diana took on a mentor's role early in his journey. She introduced him to television audiences, invited him into elite spaces, and offered him a glimpse into a world beyond his years. As Diana described it, he was like a son. She might have said that she saw so much of herself in him. Their relationship seemed warm and affectionate, almost maternal. Diana brought Michael into her world, her homes, her art, her refined upbringing, and encouraged his creativity. He, in turn, called her my mama, and the bond appeared genuine and enduring. Gradually, relationships evolve, especially in the crucible of fame. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson's career had taken off in ways that even Motown had never imagined. While Diana's legacy was already cemented, Michael was entering an era of global superstardom, and with success often come changes in alliances. Industry insiders noted that Michael began distancing himself from Diana. He skipped her events, didn't return her calls, and stopped publicly acknowledging her as his discovery. There were suspicions about resentment, about not wanting to be known primarily as Diana Ross's protégé. In some ways, the mentor had suddenly become eclipsed by the student. The emotional toll on Diana was visible. In 1989, she presented Michael with a Lifetime Achievement Award. She delivered a heartfelt speech and handed him the honor. When he took to the podium, he thanked Barry Gordy, Quincy Jones, fans, and even Bubbles, his chimpanzee. But he left Diana. It was a blow that was watched closely that night, both on stage and in the wings. Backstage, Diana was reportedly frozen, tears in her eyes, and then she whispered, "Never again, Michael." It wasn't a public admonishment, it was a private vow. Sources say she never mentored another male star after that moment. Whether it was true or a matter of dramatic flair, the gesture was a declaration of self-respect, a signal that she had limits. This wasn't the only close relationship that frayed. Diana's connection with Barry Gordy, the founder of Motown, was both romantic and professional, and deeply influential. From the moment he signed the Supremes, Barry saw her as his star, and she became the face of his vision. Their creative partnership was electric. Gordy shaped her image, guided her artistic projects, such as Lady Sings the Blues, and positioned her as Motown's golden girl. But that collaboration came at a price. According to insiders, Gordy's influence was suffocating. He had a clear idea of what Diana should sing, how she should present herself, even how she should conduct herself in public. While those decisions made for triumphs, they also created constraints. Miss a cue in his plan and you risked being reminded who held the reins. By the late 1970s, Diana was ready to reclaim her autonomy. In 1981, she signed a groundbreaking $20 million 0 cents deal with RCA, then the largest contract ever for a female recording artist. It was a bold step that symbolized her determination to control her own career. But it came at a cost. Gordy publicly beamed while privately simmering. He felt betrayed, reportedly telling associates she had forgotten who made her. She later confided, "He wanted me to be his forever. When I said no, I became the enemy." In leaving Motown, Diana cut not just professional ties, they had also been romantically involved. She was stepping away from a relationship that had given her fame and identity, and in doing so, she stepped into independence, something she insisted on for the rest of her career. From that point on, she retained more control, co-producing albums, selecting songs, and deciding which collaborators were on her terms. The shift wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Perhaps no wound cut deeper, though, than what happened with Mary Wilson. From childhood, Diana, Mary, and Florence Ballard were inseparable. They formed the Primettes, which became the Supremes and shaped Motown history. But as Diana rose to icon status, highlighted in the renaming of the group in 1967, Mary felt increasingly sidelined. Mary later spoke candidly in her memoir, Dream Girl, My Life as a Supreme, about how she felt Diana's ascent turned into a hostile takeover, one that overshadowed her and Florence. After Diana went solo in 1970, the bitterness didn't fade. It simmered for decades. In 2000, a planned Supremes reunion tour brought the tension to a head. Mary demanded equal billing, equal pay, and creative equality. Diana, backed by promoters, resisted, arguing that the offers were generous based on her contributions and that Mary had been critical of her for years. The negotiations collapsed. The tour was called off, and Mary's memoir later framed Diana as self-centered, even controlling. Diana responded only once publicly, quietly, on Oprah. "I wanted to heal the past. She wanted to relive it." It was a poignant line. Where Diana sought reconciliation, Mary sought vindication. It was a fissure between sisters that was never to fully close. Each of these relationships points to a central theme. Diana Ross learned, often painfully, that closeness in this industry can be fleeting. When personal affection, power, and business collide, alliances shift. With Michael Jackson, she lost an adopted son's gratitude to the magnetism of global superstardom. With Berry Gordy, she transitioned from muse to independent artist, at the cost of a romantic and professional bond. And with Mary Wilson, she confronted the ache of broken sisterhood, of a shared childhood fractured by fame. These reckonings, however, were not a descent. They were transformation. Each fallout forced Diana to sharpen her boundaries, clarify her identity, and assert her autonomy. She went from being discovered and crafted to becoming a curator of her own legacy. Today, speaking openly about these relationships shows depth and integrity, not bitterness. She's demonstrating that her silence wasn't simply compliance, it was calculation. She didn't shy from confrontation by accident. She chose pathways that protected her reputation and her emotional well-being. That path wasn't easy, and it didn't come without emotional cost. But through it all, Diana Ross emerged, not weakened, but tempered. She became an artist who understood the value of self-possession and who refused to accept respect only on others' terms. As she names names and recounts moments of betrayal, she is above all else educating. She's showing that the price of a crown is often hidden, and that grace isn't just about performance. Sometimes it's about learning when to walk away, when to say no, and when to speak up. By the 980th, Diana Ross had firmly established herself as a cultural icon. But being at the top doesn't protect you from rivalry, unkind words, or lost opportunities. In Part 3, we explore 3 key figures in the music industry who impacted Ross's journey in public and professional ways: Aretha Franklin, David Bowie, and Quincy Jones. Aretha Franklin and Diana Ross were 2 stars at the very top of their game. Franklin, the undisputed queen of soul, and Ross, Motown's elegant ambassador, shared stages at awards shows and events. Both had influence, style, and powerful voices, but the media often framed them as rivals. In 1985, that quiet tension erupted into a moment that few remember, but that marked a turning point in their relationship. At a televised tribute to Stevie Wonder, Ross stepped on stage during a group number to greet Franklin, offering a handshake. But Aretha simply turned away, without acknowledgement, and continued singing. The audience barely noticed the subtle slight, but anyone nearby did. What might have been a friendly gesture became a symbolic moment. 2 legends at odds, not unity. Shortly afterwards, Franklin amplified the distance between them in an interview. She didn't name names, but she said, "Some people sing, some people pose." It was a cutting line, delivered with enough subtlety to raise eyebrows and leave Ross and audiences wondering who she meant. Ross didn't respond publicly. She didn't confront it in press or issue a rebuttal. Still, those backstage who were close to Ross say the comments stung, even if she chose not to fight publicly. The moment came again during rehearsals for another event. Aretha was heard telling a musician that Ross's singing was stage whispering with sequins. An onlooker heard Diana smiling, saying nothing, but later she confided to a friend, "She can out-sing me, but never outclass me." That line spoke volumes. Ross understood her own worth, without letting words undermine it. Soon after they avoided sharing the same bill, Diana decided her performances and collaborations would no longer be subject to petty rivalries masked as wit. Their paths after that encounter tell part of the story. Aretha continued performing at major events. Diana carried on the global tours and hits. But they rarely appeared together again. Their relationship shifted from competition to polite distance. For Ross, it wasn't about winning an argument. It was about preserving dignity. Next in this part is David Bowie. The British innovator came from a different musical tradition, but he and Ross crossed paths in the 1970s and early 80s. They moved in shared social circles, admired each other's artistry, and there were whispers of studio collaborations and even partnership on stage. Their intersection felt promising, a perfect blend of Bowie's edginess and Ross's signature sophistication. In 1980, Ross released Upside Down, a hit produced by Cheeks Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards. It was a reinvention, funky, bold, and commercially successful, topping the charts. Bowie didn't produce the track, but he and Ross remained colleagues and mutual fans. Later that year, a private party in London brought them back into contact. That's where the moment happened. At a gathering of high-profile guests, Bowie made a harsh remark about Upside Down. He called it glossy nonsense for bored housewives. People laughed. In the industry, sarcasm is common, but this cut closer. Ross wasn't present, but she heard. Where someone might dismiss his comment as irony, for Ross it felt personal. A dismissal of artistry at her expense. Ross chose not to call attention to it in interviews or public statements. However, those in her circle say she cancelled planned UK appearances and told her team she was hurt, humiliated even. It was an emotional response, not calculated. Never again did she work with Bowie or share stages with him. At concerts that year, Upside Down was always among the first songs, an act of reclamation and defiance, a reminder that her art was not easily dismissed by jokes. Ross's response encapsulates a larger theme in her career. She remained dignified in public, but that didn't mean she wasn't affected. Her decision to avoid Bowie professionally and put Upside Down front and center in her shows was a silent statement that her voice and her choices deserved respect. Finally, in this part is Quincy Jones. By the early 1980s, Jones was arguably the most sought-after producer in music. He had just worked on Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, positioning him as a creative force. His name carried weight. Diana, seeking to step beyond Motown and establish her identity as a solo artist, saw him as a perfect collaborator. She had finished a record deal with RCA and was ready to craft a new sound. Working with Jones could have signaled both commercial success and personal vindication. According to insiders, her team reached out and at first there were signs of interest, but then Jones reportedly pulled away, dismissing her as past her prime and too difficult. Those words, if true, undermine an artist's self-confidence, especially when they come from someone whose vision you respect. Ross took the rejection quietly. She didn't launch a media attack. She didn't dwell in interviews. But when her autobiography was released in 1993, she included a single reference. Sometimes the men you admire the most admire someone else. The phrasing was cryptic enough to avoid overt criticism, but pointed enough to register among those in the know. Jones and Ross never worked together. That silence spoke volumes. Yet, in the absence of collaboration, Ross continued to shape her sound. She worked with other producers, built albums on her own terms, and showed the industry that difficult could mean determined, not damaged. Her career didn't stall, it evolved on her terms. When you look at these three relationships in tandem, a pattern emerges. Ross encountered tension with powerful voices. Aretha Franklin, a peer, David Bowie, an admired colleague, Quincy Jones, a potential creative force. None were close friends or former mentors in the way Michael Jackson or Barry Gordy had been, but each influenced how she positioned herself in the broader music landscape. In response to offhand insults, dismissive comments, or professional rejection, Ross consistently chose dignity. She didn't fight through headlines or legal moves. She quietly recalibrated, either by avoiding professional overlap, as with Aretha and Bowie, or by forging alternative creative alliances, as with Quincy Jones. This approach revealed both caution and conviction. She recognized that she was responsible for her own legacy. Other artists' opinions or perceived slights did not define her. When comments were meant to reduce her, she refused to let them. Her legacy from this time wasn't defined by who declined to work with her or who shrugged her off. It was shaped by what she chose to do instead. Upside Down became emblematic of her resilience. Her continued success after the Bowie comment was proof that she could thrive even without industry validation. Similarly, the lack of a Quincy Jones partnership didn't derail her. She kept producing new music, touring, and building her image in film and stage. In some ways, These professional setbacks and the maturity with which she handled them helped shape her later choices. Peace and professionalism became her style. Past hurts didn't mean future limits. She built a career not on emotional comeback shows, but on steady presence, celebrated artistry, and careful reinvention. In 1981, Diana Ross recorded Endless Love with Lionel Richie. It wasn't just another duet. It was a defining moment. Endless Love became one of the decade's most enduring love songs, reaching #1 on the charts and winning hearts worldwide. The pairing was electric. Ross with her timeless soul and Richie with his smooth R&B warmth struck the perfect balance. Given the success of the single, a full co-headline tour was put into motion. Promoters envisioned nights of music magic, shared spotlights, and a celebration of the duet that stole the world's attention. Both artists had the stature to pull it off. Diana brought decades of stage command and Lionel brought modern chart appeal. It made sense. Fans expected tickets to sell fast, and excitement was high. Everything was in place. Contracts were drafted, stages were designed, choreography rehearsed. The industry was buzzing. There was practically an assumption that they would conquer the world together on tour. Then, in a twist that caught many off guard, Lionel Richie withdrew from the tour. He cited creative differences in public statements. Behind the scenes, however, insiders say something more calculated was at play. Richie had recently secured a solo record deal, and the label wanted him to strike out on his own. Sharing top billing with Diana Ross, still a global force, meant sharing media attention, applause, and possibly overshadowing his solo identity. If he could become a solo star in his own right, there was more money to be made and more rooms in the spotlight. Alone. By stepping away from Diana, Richie chose independence. It was strategic. For Diana, the shift came as a blow. Then came the silence. There were no angry interviews, no public accusations. She didn't turn bassist and record producer Akon and dramatize the story. She simply moved on. An understated move in an industry driven by headlines. At the time, she confided to a close friend, "We created magic, and he turned it into a memory." That line reveals both disappointment and acceptance. She acknowledged the loss without anger. It wasn't drama, it was fact and loss. The significance here is twofold. First, it marked another moment where Diana Ross encountered betrayal, not just from colleagues, but from someone she had trusted. They had shared moments in the studio, the excitement of creation. To have it become a strategic career misalignment was hurtful. Second, it foreshadowed what would come next in her life, a willingness to speak honestly, finally, about what she had endured over decades. There were no lawsuits, no headline frenzy, no long social media rants. That wasn't her style. Instead, she let the absent speak. And when the soundtrack of her life would later recite its verses, that silence would carry meaning. In the years following Endless Love's chart success, Diana made conscious choices about her path. She moved forward creatively with her head held high. She collaborated with other artists on her own terms. She performed regularly, released new music, and solidified herself as an artistic leader in her own right. All the while, what had once been silent sagas, I think Richie was just one of several notes in that melody, became part of a broader picture she was building. The world began to see that behind the glimmer and pearls was a woman who had spoken less than she might have, angled more than bargained for, and preserved her reputation in silence. As time passed, yes, the music continued, but something changed within Diana Ross. She no longer needed to maintain an image of unbothered perfection. She no longer needed the world to believe she was always in control. She understood that transparency, well crafted, careful, honest, could offer something richer than mystique, connection. That brings us to now. Around the time she turned 81, Diana Ross began to speak more openly about the incidents that shaped her life, private and public. She didn't create controversies. She didn't invite tabloids. She told her story with sobriety and self-reflection. This shift in tone reflects a different phase of life. It's not about bitterness, it's about legacy. She's laying out her journey, not charting blame. She's naming names not for shock value, but to acknowledge finally who influenced her life in ways she couldn't ignore any longer. It's complicated, honored. By now, partly because time softens the consequences. Names that weren't safe to speak in the 80s or 90s or 90s become easier to name decades later. Moments that had to be managed in private now feel ripe for public explanation. And partly because Diana is in a place where she can frame her story, choose what to reveal, how to reveal it, and for what purpose. Her public reflections echo a central theme: survival. She was not just a performer facing critiques or cold shoulders. She was a woman in charge of her own destiny. She weathered patriarchy, racism, artistic rivalry, betrayal, and the constant undercurrent of expectation that Black women in entertainment continue to face. She reminds us that her decisions, walking away, moving on quietly, draping fills with the power of a performance, were not signs of weakness. They were acts of strength. The people she worked with, the people who left her in silence or who shifted lanes when the stakes changed, their actions become part of her story, but they do not define her. Instead, they reveal the cost of stardom and the necessity of preserving one's truth. That's the final part of Diana Ross's public creativity journey. She began in an era when artists were expected to be pliant and private. She lived through everything, from sibling rivalry to industry politics, from mentorship broken to duet deals dissolved. And yet, she's here now, offering her story not in sound bites, but in reflection. In this way, her entire story becomes a lesson in resilience, in choosing silence over spectacle, and in finding empowerment not by waging public feuds, but by holding her own story quietly until the time was right. Then she spoke. What started with a discarded production token in Las Vegas became a lifetime of quiet power. In the end, Diana Ross didn't seek revenge. She sought truth. She didn't chase headlines. She chased dignity. That, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of her decades-long journey, showing us what it means to survive, to lead, and to speak, not from weakness, but from strength.